So what we thought we would do today is do a little kind of stroll down memory lane. And the reason I would like to do that for everyone is because having seen kind of the ESG evolution, the sustainable investment evolution for many years, um, I think that if we don't look at, again, history, we don't know how to plan for the future as well as we would otherwise. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back, I guess it's about 35 years. And it was then that the nuns, the Catholic, the Franciscan nuns, started to align their investments with their values. They were the first to talk about shareholder resolutions, whether it was about energy, getting out of apartheid South Africa. So it was the nuns, those who are faithful, that started the movement, frankly. And then you started to see those that are thoughtful that started to come in to the world of ESG and ESG analysis. And so those were the people like the Interface Center for Corporate Responsibility, thoughtful and interested and curious. And so the next step of those who came in are the pragmatic, and I'll put myself in that category, but those that saw that this kind of analysis, ESG analysis, which by the way is a discipline, it's not an investment style. There's no such thing as ESG investing. It's a discipline. So those of us in that pragmatic category started to understand that this is potentially really constructive, this being that systematic analysis of material ESG factors. And after the pragmatic came the opportunistic. All right. So those that began to think, okay, this is interesting in terms of data that asset managers want to use, that we could start to think about rankings and ratings. But after the opportunistic, unfortunately, came the disingenuous, those who explicitly saw ESG as something they could move and manipulate. And they did put it in the category of investing and creating investment products. By the way, as a little data point, I think it was Morningstar. This is just a few years ago, who noticed that the vast majority, and by the way, this is when everything's hot, like ESG is a party. So it's however many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was Morningstar, they came out with a data point that the vast majority, I'm talking like 90%, of new ESG, sustainability and impact funds, vast majority were simply funds that already existed that were renamed. All right. So there's no heritage of impact and sustainability there. There's the use of data. And then, by the way, we got to a point where you went from the disingenuous to the destructive, frankly. And unfortunately, that's kind of where we are now. All right. So this is where ESG data, which by the way, I will guarantee, I spent a lot of years as a director of research. I will guarantee that almost every piece of ESG data out there is wrong. I will guarantee it. All right. Because there's just not enough specificity, and you're missing a lot in just using ESG data. So in any case, again, the reason it became destructive is because you had these ratings and rankings, and then indices were created around that, and then funds were created around these indices, and then these funds went out there and they're hugging benchmarks that, frankly, it doesn't do anything. So this is the trajectory. This is the history of ESG development. And by the way, full disclosure, Lori mentioned, I was one of the founding board members of the SASB, right? In the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, our objective, and this was great when we first introduced it, right? I'm looking after sector research, right? And with the SASB, we were looking for standards for disclosure of data from companies. Disclosure is so important, right? Why would we have the data and the SASB? SASB was a piece of infrastructure. The problem is it got misinterpreted as not just standards for disclosure, but it got misinterpreted that this was a standard that you had to live up to. This was, standards that you had to meet and beat. That's not what SASB was intended to be. So of course that got distorted too. ESG analysis, ESG data is simply a starting point for inquiry. All right. That's it. And so those that kind of used it, as we talked about, in a disingenuous and destructive way, it's really, frankly, screwed up, the sector. It's really screwed up the discipline, which is a shame because the starting point was incredibly well intentioned. Yeah. So in any case, I want to talk about for a moment what you don't get in ESG, which is frankly the important stuff, the economics, the strategy. You don't get any of that, right? So you're not getting any information about productivity. You're not getting any information about systems thinking in a company. So how one piece of the kind of ecosystem touches other pieces of the ecosystem. You're not getting any information about creativity, of a company. What is, their place in the kind of ecosystem and what can they do to harden their place in that? No information there. You're not getting an understanding of how they're building competitive advantage. You're not getting real world impact. You're not getting anything as it relates to capacity building. You're not getting anything, even on basic things. You're not getting anything about, say, how they really manage and audit their supply chain, right? So it's hard things as well as big structural things. You are not getting any of that for ESG data. And again, that's from someone that believed so strongly in infrastructure around investing. So in any case, that little stroll down memory lane makes me a little sad, but it's critical. And what I can tell you is that's why I'm at a firm that really thinks about economics and really thinks about the intersection of economics and strategy and investing for the long term, and working on an economic flywheel that gives us the opportunity to have a productive and constructive environment.